Now, it's my pleasure to introduce today our presenters. First, we have Steve Twitchell. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well.
All right.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience, Steve? I see that you have spent some time serving our country.
Well, yeah, thanks, Robert. I was formerly trained in the United States Air Force, as environmental engineering, specializing in water and wastewater industrial treatment. Had the honor of serving during the Gulf War, and was able to provide water to our thirsty troops out there in that theater.
Wow. Thanks for your service. We really appreciate that. And so what's your present position?
I'm currently the plant supervisor at the Rinconada Water Treatment Plant located here in Los Gatos. The Rinconada Water Treatment Plant serves the valley, the west part of the valley, of over 1 million people. Wonderful,
wonderful. And is there something grand that you've been involved in lately?
Well, we're going through a very large project here at the plant. We're basically, Rinconada Water Treatment Plant is 50 years old, and so we're doing complete plant retrofit. The exciting part is during the retrofit, we have to keep the plant running because we're the only water treatment plant on the west side of the valley, providing the water to our folks down there. And so that could be very challenging.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, let's move on to our Miss Lydia Rossiter. Hello, Lydia.
Hi, guys.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know that you got some interesting things going on in your life.
So I've been working in local government for 20 years and with water districts and municipal water for 10 of those. My background is in finance and capital improvement, project management, all kinds of projects, all kinds of sizes, from projects under $1 million to projects over $2 billion. So huge range there. I'm a little bit of a certification junkie, so I'm certified in water treatment, water distribution, and wastewater treatment, and that's to understand it better. Just being on the finance side is not quite enough to be able to really understand and help, I think. So I have those certifications as well.
That's great. That's great. I remember you telling me about your certification junkie status. Yes. All right. Well, you guys have some great things planned for us today. So without any further ado, let's dive into this great topic that you guys have presented for us.
Okay, our first thing is we have a polling question.
All right, we got a polling question. All right. Here we go. What is your primary role in your organization? Is it operations, maintenance, capital planning, finance, engineering, senior management, or something other? I see responses coming in. Great. Great. All right, let's make sure everyone gets a chance to chime in. This is good. We're going to give it a few more seconds here. Yes. All right. All right. We're going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right. Closing the poll. Let's see the results.
A lot of engineering folks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Yeah. Operations, maintenance, awesome. We got quite no senior management though.
Interesting. By the way, everyone, if you can, please type in your organization and your job title into the chat so we can know exactly who you are and what position you have. So take some time to do that right now, if you can. Great, great. Interesting that it's engineering folks. Maybe there's a reason for that. And maybe we'll hear our presenters speak to that to some extent. All right, let's see what else our presenters have for us today.
All right, next slide, Steve.
Close that out. Okay. Bear with me here. I have technical difficulties. There we go.
All right, so today's agenda, we're going to talk about finance and operations involvement in the first step, planning for what you need and what you need to do. Pre-project, so you've come up with a project, what happens next? How does operations and finance need to be involved in order to make it as successful as possible? Same thing for during the project and project closeout, and these are all equally important. So we're going to go through them today and hopefully give you some things to take back and use at your agencies. For today, we have a 90-minute session total. As Robert said, type questions into the Q&A box, not the chat box. And just a note for you is that this is aimed at kind of medium-sized agencies, but it's scalable. Steve and I both worked for me for a very large agency, but we've also done really small, and we want to make sure that this is applicable to as many people as possible. So many of you have seen this before. This is a traditional project cycle. So traditionally, you think about what you need, you plan for what it is, you design it, you construct it, and you do closeout, which is turning it over to O&M and making sure all the finance pieces are buttoned up. And this, I think, does not really give the full picture. So Steve and I are going to talk about what's missing from this picture. But I think we have a polling question, another polling question next.
Yes.
That looks like it was a big project.
Definitely. So here's the second question here. If you are currently involved in a capital project, what phase are you in? Planning, design, construction, or closeout transition to O&M? All right. Responses are coming in. Great. Great, I see. Interesting. We'll give it a few more seconds here. All right, we'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Oh goodness! So we have a good distribution of everything.
Yeah.
With most people in design, but it's a great distribution. I'm glad to hear that.
Okay, so when should operation and maintenance get involved in the planning process? All through it. It's very, very important that O&M and stakeholders, proper stakeholders, get involved in the capital planning project all the way to closeout. There's a lot of good insight, a lot of good mindsets, and can really help the flow of a project, large or small.
And from a finance perspective, I think it's very important to stress that O&M involvement and finance involvement throughout the project saves you money. It can really cut down on change orders. It can cut down on confusion and delays. and it can cut down on the kind of emergency things that always cost lots of extra money. It also can affect other projects if you've got dissonance that is really affecting how the project is moving forward. So if one project is delayed, guess what? Chances are other projects are going to be delayed as well, because you can't work on too many components of the same system or treatment plan at once, and that's really important. It also affects trust between all the players in the room, between you and the contractor, construction management, project management, the board or council, and the customer or retailer. And in order to support that trust as much as possible, one of the keys that we're going to be stressing today is communication. So starting at the capital planning phase, so what do we need to do? I just want to go through this briefly. So good capital planning really empowers you to meet the customer needs, meet regulatory requirements. Those are kind of the things that you would normally think about when you think about what do we need to build in order to make our system work better or just continue to work. But I also want to stress these other three as well, which is it improves safety and security. That's always one that we stress. It also supports longer asset life. If you plan correctly, it will help you in the long run. And it allows you to budget money according to your priorities. If you're always having to run after the latest thing that is breaking, you're going to find that you never get to the things that you wanted to do in the first place, because you're always chasing the latest emergency, and that costs more money in the long run in total, but it also means that other things may break as you're trying to deal with emergencies, and that can be a problem. Next slide.
So communication is key. And if you are in a meeting or could be a weekly construction meeting, it could be, anything, and you're communicating. And when you're talking, you see this across from you, they're not understanding what you're trying to say, or you may be doing this and they're not understanding, you're not understanding. So it's really important to be on the same page and communicate effectively through the project, through the entire process of the project.
And from a finance perspective, I want to elaborate on why this costs more money. So the old way of thinking about pre-project is to run it to failure. Not necessarily by design, but it just happens that way if you don't plan differently. The new way, or the better way, is to forecast what you need to repair, place, or build, and when. If it's 10 years out and other things need to be done in the meantime, that's very important. If there are improvements that you want to explore prior to putting in new equipment, that's really important to do as well. The old way is to replace as needed, and the new way is to sequence the improvements so that it's as logical as possible. Steve will be the first to tell you that in a treatment plant, it's really crucial to think about what you're replacing when, and what comes first and what comes second. Because, for example, you can't increase capacity on one part of the plant and have the flow come through to another part of the plant, and oops, the tank is too small. Those kinds of things are really important to think about when you're thinking about, okay, what do I need to replace and when? The old way would be rushed timelines followed by delays. I've seen this a lot in the various agencies I've worked for. We need to hurry up and get to construction, and then, okay, oops, we've got to wait for that big valve that we ordered to come in from wherever it's being manufactured, and there's usually a huge wait time on large valves. But you need to think forward and then think, okay, so if these things need to be ordered ahead of time, we need to tell the contractor to order them first as we start mobilizing for construction. And the other big piece that you need to keep in mind is the time for regulatory approval. Permits is usually the big question mark when we're talking about large projects or projects that are environmentally sensitive areas. And allowing enough time for that really creates expectations that are realistic as much as you can. I mean, you can't control delays at the state or federal level, but thinking about how long that might take is really helpful to making sure that you don't budget a lot of money and then have it sit there for a long time. That's having it sit there is not great in several ways, but it's important to keep things flowing and sequencing as perfectly as possible. Next, please. I think this is you, Steve.
No, this is you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the main thing on this is that anything to do with timing leads to costing something. I think we recognize that in our personal lives. If you want something urgent, you're going to pay more for it. If you're going to redo something that's not free, you're going to pay more for that as well. As I said, if there's lead time, you need to plan for that. Otherwise, you're going to be faced with a delay claim, and you don't want that at all. And project management. I've been in a couple circumstances where, okay, we need to hurry up and do the project. Oh, we don't have in-house staff to do that. We need to contract out just because we're not quite ready to have somebody inside there to supervise it. But having the right people in the right place at the right time is an important part of project management. And from a cash flow perspective, and this is the boring finance part, you really want to spend the money when you need to. You don't want to hold millions of dollars outside of investments in order to be able to pay something immediately when you're not actually going to pay it immediately. And you can think about things like phased encumbrances, which is putting money in the project as you're going to use it, with a little cushion in there to be conservative. But it's not always necessary to have the whole chunk of cash at the beginning, especially if it's a long project and you've got a lot of permitting or other question marks that you're going to need to think about as time goes out. Next slide. Okay, so how do you start capital planning? Since many of you are in the design phase, we hope that you've done this part as well. So what's broken? When do you need it? And what are your limitations? And Steve is going to talk about this extensively. But there are all sorts of limitations that can really get in the way of a project being successful and moving on time. And we're going to talk about some of those key ones, especially space. Oh my goodness, space, whether you have a large project or a small project, space can be a problem unless you're working where Steve is working, out in outer space. All right, Steve, let's talk about that space.
All right, let's talk about logistics. Thank you. In any project, as Lydia said, space is at a premium, especially if you have multiple projects that are either overlapping or butting up against each other, because the contractors, they're going to scramble for space for it. And so it's really important to talk very early in the conversation in the design phase on key aspects. For instance, laydown areas. Unless you have a greenfield project where space is unlimited and it's not an issue, but 9 times out of 10 that's not necessarily the case. So laydown area is very important to find out exactly what the contractor needs, is asking for, and probably expand upon that. I have a slide that will show you that. Parking. This gets overlooked. For instance, if it's a large project, current project that we have going, at one point there's the contractor said they're going to have 150 people. Well, everybody likes their own cars and they want to drive their own cars. They don't like carpooling, and so you have to take an effect. Okay, where are we going to park 150 personal owned vehicles, as well as all of the supporting equipment for the project: cranes, excavators, utility trucks, and it goes on and on and on. Construction trailers. You know, where are they going to be located? Are they going to be located where the contractors are going to be away from the site? Are going to be within the site? And you know, the one that always gets restrooms, wash facilities. Where are they going to be located? Another very, very important one is site access and accessibility. Routes of travel. Again, you're going to see a slide here that will show you kind of the restrictions that we've had in certain projects. Big one, security. If it's out in the middle of nowhere, you're going to need security for you know, overnight you know, security. And then, you know, on a site like active water treatment plant, you have to have security guards checking identification. That should be put in the thought process. And of course, safety. Actually, safety should be at the top, but safety is very important, not only for the contractor, but for the staff that's going to be interacting in the construction site. You know, do they have the proper PPE? Is routes of travel for walking? Is it safe? Uneven surfaces? So that kind of thing.
And Steve, before you
Sure.
move on to the next thing, I just want to give an example of what this is like for a small project that
Sure.
could have problems with this. So at another agency that I worked for, we were putting a monitoring well in a sidewalk in a residential area. And we were lucky and unlucky. We were lucky because it was located right at the front of a flag lot. So there was a lot of space where the house on that property was not located. And we thought, oh, okay, this is great. This is perfect. We'll cut these brambles and we'll use this as the laydown area. Well, there were two problems with that. One is that once you start drilling a well, you need to keep going. So there was still intrusion into the street because we had a large drill rig sitting on the sidewalk, and it drilled until it was all the way down where it needed to be. And the second was there are always surprises. And I'm sure Steve will talk about this a lot later as well. But so we cleared the brambles on that site, and there was an abandoned well that was uncovered. And that meant that we needed a little more time to figure out with the property owner what to do about that in order to use the site properly, appropriately, and safely. So Steve's going to talk about a very large site, but even a 20 by 20 site can have its issues depending on where it is. Even though it looked like a field, it still had problems.
All right, thank you for that. So this is we're talking about logistics again. So here's a photo of my little water treatment plant, and this is, you know, before construction. And you know, one question is, okay, laydown area. Well, it looks like there's lots of space for laydown area on this map. And then parking, looks like there's plenty of space for parking. Construction trailers, okay, we got rooms for construction trailers. Site access and accessibility looks pretty open to me, right? And obviously it's secure because it's fenced and it's got security guards, stuff like that. Well, I mean, reality turns into this. This is the project as it sits now, for the most part. And you can kind of see, I'm going to use my cursor. So laydown area turned out to be anywhere there was some open dirt. It looked at, I mean, we have piping stored over here. We've got spoils and stuff down here. We've got parts and pieces here. Parking was a chore. We have parking in the parking lot. We have parking on this hill. And we had to lease property behind these reservoirs for overflow parking. Because again, we had up to 150, 120 people on site at any one given time, including district staff, and they all needed a place to park. Construction trailers. Well, there's construction trailers that are put on top of my process here. These are tank farms or chemicals. Construction trailer, construction trailer, construction trailer, and then construction trailer. Okay, and then restrooms. Restrooms were put out throughout. Now here's the big one. If I go back route of travel looked pretty open. But wait, we filled in all the spaces, and actually some of the stuff encroached into roadways. As you can see, that's a load all. But everything gets filled up pretty quick, and that causes an issue. And safety, very uneven surfaces, a lot of trucks running around. Now, mind you, this plant has to stay in operation. We're producing water. Looking by the configuration of the plant, it's probably in the low flow seasons, but the plant's still working. So one of the things, again, route of travel and accessibility is key. So next we have a video. It's a little long, but it kind of shows you the logistics of putting in a very long building that we had to bring on site. It was pre-manufactured. It came across the country, and what the real hiccup was trying to get it into the plant. Wee hours of the morning. Now, mind you, this thing, I think it started in, Lydia, do you remember where it started from? In the Midwest somewhere.
Yeah, in the Midwest somewhere. And this is a residential neighborhood, I would point out too, for those who are not familiar with it. This is in the middle of a residential neighborhood in the middle of the night.
Very affluent neighborhood. Now, this building is built to house VFDs, MCCs for the flocculators for my flock sed basin. That is part of the new project. So instead of building something on site, it was more cost effective to be able to have it pre-manufactured and then brought in. Got the streets blocked off, making sure nobody's running up and down the hill. Now they're going to be making a turn into the plant. Uh-oh, this may not work. And that's literally what everybody's thinking. So one of the concerns that if they brought it in, that they may have to hop a curb. And anybody that's driving rigs before knows that that's the last thing you want to do, because you could lose a tire. And losing multiple tires because the access point was so tight would actually list the building to one side, whatever side the tires were compromised on, would turn possibly damage the building. So you can kind of see when the flashlight hits how close they are to the curbs. And I don't know if you can hear the audio on it, but there's people with radios, and they're just trying to figure out the logistics on getting this oversized, very long building into the plant via the lower gate.
And Steve, this is not where we thought the problem would be.
No.
Right? That we thought the problem would be having to crane it over the portions of the treatment plant. And we thought that was kind of the nail-biting moment. But this really is the nail-biting moment right here, is figuring out how to get it through the gate.
And I think also the original thought process was they were able to maneuver that thing within and be able to do a quick lift onto, stage the truck right next to the electrical pad and do a quick lift. I think that was the original thought process. But, as I showed you in that past photo of how the plant was impacted by staging and all the laydown areas, that was not going to be feasible. So what they did, they're able to, once they got into it, put it right into the center of the construction site. Yeah, now they figured out where we're going to have to hop the curb.
You got the fence very close on the other side as well. So this is a tricky spot. And you don't want to take down the fence at a treatment plant because it's a secure area.
Right. I think they did take out some of my plants though. I still don't think I've been reimbursed for that.
Now they're up on the curb.
Mm-hmm. And they literally made it in by inches. But thank goodness no damage was done to the truck, no damage was done to the building, and it was the sex. But it was, It was pretty exciting there for a bit. So this is another part of the logistics. So once they got it in, they kind of cantilevered it over by one of the processes, but then they had to crane it over some existing buildings. What they're craning it over, you can see, is an electrical pad that we had to build because we didn't have enough space. So we built, basically add landscape to the plant, and to be able to put generators and supporting equipment, transformers and stuff. But they had to crane that over, you know, and one little boo-boo would have been a big boo-boo. All right, so during the project, through operations, and again, we're communication, communicate. Oh my gosh, communicate. It's important that it's fluid through the entire process. And we're talking owners to the CMs to the PMs, PMs to the owner, you know, and as well as the inspectors that are out there in the field, making sure that they're communicating effectively and fluidly to all the stakeholders into the thing, because you never know what kind of inspector you're going to get. So the inspector that's shown in that picture there was not very communicative, and it was really hard to understand what she was thinking half the time. So
And she's not wearing PPE.
Yeah, and that's one thing. PPE is so important. What she's missing is a hard hat, so she refused to wear the hard hat. Don't let the conversation get lost. Speak the same language. And what I found, especially on larger projects, is you know, everybody has their own lingo. Engineering has their own lingo, operations has their own lingo, finance has their own lingo, capital has, you know, make sure we're all speaking, when I say the language, we're all talking the same talk. Submittals, you know, every project you have submittals. And, you know, in the specifications, there's usually language in there that says you have to get submittals back in you have 7 days, you have 10 days, you have 12, whatever it is in the specs. But if you can, you don't want to wait until there's 7 days, send in something that's probably not right, and they're gonna have to resubmit. That just lengthens out the project. And so we don't like that. And so milestones and timelines. You know, if there's a milestone, you know, you got to hit that. And timelines. So it says here, Steve's story time. So of course I got a story about it. We're in a project, pretty large project, and the contractor's saying that this one process, which is going to need a startup and commissioning for, is going to be done on this certain date. And we're all looking at how the process of the project process is going, and we're all thinking, well, they're not going to meet this milestone. In the construction meetings, they're like, yes, we're going to meet this milestone. Yes, we're going to meet this milestone. Well, you know, I had a vacation set up, a cruise to the Bahamas, and my manager says, you need to be here for this commissioning. You know, of course I would be there because I'm the plant supervisor. And it's getting closer. We're 6 months out, we're 5 months out, we're 4 months out, and we're looking, and we're like, this is not going to get done. This milestone's not going to be met. Well, I had to cancel because my manager gave me a directive that I had to be there. I had to cancel my cruise. And of course, the milestone wasn't met. It wasn't even close. So I was a little disappointed, obviously. And one of the things that I did is I started holding a little bit of a grudge. I'm like, you know, I can't trust this. If you're not going to communicate effectively, how can I trust you? And that's a terrible place to be in a project. So we want to try to communicate effectively and meet those milestones and timelines.
And from a finance perspective, it's the same story. Communicate. Finance is there to support you in your project management, and doing our best as well to make sure that you make it on time, on budget, with the scope that you were looking for. But if you come to my cube at 7:30 in the morning, and this has happened to me, and say, I need $50 million, it's going to be a while before I can get you that money. And that's an extreme example, but even if you need $500,000, there are some barriers to that. And the more that finance knows ahead of time, the more we can help you. It's being aware of lead times, but in a different way. Lead times for going to the board or council can be 2 to 8 weeks. Lead times to get things through finance. You know, I'm perfectly willing to call in favors, but I can't do it every time. And that's something that it's just important to communicate and work through. What do you need? When do you need it? Okay, surprise has come up. What do you want to do? Let's talk to finance about what you can do. And we'll do our best. But there are some things that we cannot go around, like thresholds for where the board or council has to approve changes to the project. While the project's in process, there are some important things that finance is going to be looking at. And again, we're not trying to get in the way. We're trying to have this go as smoothly as possible. And some of the key things that we'd be looking at are, is the purchase order set up correctly? You know, you've got the construction contract or a consultant agreement. And we want to make sure that those tasks are set up the way that you need them. Is retention being held correctly? I've been in the position a couple times where retention either wasn't held on every invoice or was held incorrectly on invoices. And trying to sort that out can be a huge pain, not just for the project manager, but for the whole chain in finance. We want it to go as smoothly as possible. And once that money goes out the door, the chances of getting it back from the contractor, you know, possibly withholding it on a different invoice, get a little slimmer. So it's important to have those things correct from the get-go. Otherwise, it's a lot of cleanup afterwards. And you better bet I'd be bringing in the project manager to sit with me when I am cleaning that up to make sure it's correct, and to also spread the pain a little bit of having to deal with it, because it's not fun. The other things we'll be looking at is, are items being charged correctly to the project? Incorrect items not being charged to the project. This happens on charges big and little. It's just a mistake, and it's something that it's best to catch early, because then you're aware of where your budget is, and if any adjustments are needed, you'll know. And my personal favorite is a change order amendment of scope leading to a budget adjustment that's big enough that it requires board or council approval. So now we're talking an agenda memo plus a budget adjustment form. All the numbers need to be correct. This is not going to be an instant thing. And if you're doing a project that has timelines either seasonally or regulatory or something like that, like my favorite example is reservoir, replacing the slide gates on a reservoir. You want to do it at a certain time of year so that it's not a problem when you need to access the reservoir during the dry season and use that water. So it's important that I help you keep on your construction timeline. But if you need $800,000 more and that needs to go to the council for approval, you know, that's not instant. It's going to take me 6 weeks to get that done. So the sooner I know that that's a problem, the more I can do that lead work ahead of time and get you in a spot that's the best we can possibly do given the circumstances. And I think we acknowledge that throughout the project, things will come up. You know, there are things that you absolutely just cannot control as they happen during the project, whether it's archaeological effects or flooding or, you know, rain delays. There are all sorts of things that can happen. And we're just trying to help you navigate through that in the best way we can, following the rules that we have to go along with. And it takes kind of a village to get that done. And sometimes it takes sitting down and talking with the purchasing manager or the risk manager and saying, okay, this is what we'd like to do. This is what we're facing. Do you have any other suggestions? And keeping that dialogue open is really important to making sure that as you get through the project, that things go as smoothly as possible. Nobody's trying to get in the way, but we do need to follow the rules. So it's the more dialogue, the better from my perspective.
So we're going to talk about transition to operations and maintenance, you know, small utilities versus large utilities. As previously stated, I've had the opportunity to be on very small utility projects and very large ones. What I found is sometimes the larger utilities get more compartmentalized because there's more departments involved in a large project. And again, sometimes, communication gets lost or misplaced. Smaller utilities O&M are more closely involved, all the way from the pre-planning, design, and working with all the stakeholders. I had the opportunity to work on a very small it was a large project for a very small district. We were going to redesign and reinstall new metering pumps and chemical tanks, and putting in a on-site OCL generator. Very forward thinking for a small water agency. And so O&M, we got the first 30% review, and we're reviewing them. And the metering pumps were kind of put back to back. There were 6 metering pumps. They were put back to back with like less than 20 inches between the metering pumps. Well, as we all know, metering pumps need to be serviced. They need to be calibrated, and the calibration columns were within this 20-inch space. And I know I'm not 20 inches thin, and I have to go in there. And so we talked to we were like, this was one of the first things we saw. We're like, well, we need to be able to it needs to be accessible. And the engineer, which was an in-house engineer, was like, well, I think this is plenty of space. If we do this, we're going to have to, move it around. But we started working together to find a solution to this. And what happened, we found a solution is instead of putting back to back, we made a little L shape where we had accessibility behind and put the calibration columns in front of the metering pump. And so that resolved it. And I'm glad that we caught it, because that would have been a huge change order, if it was later on down in the design. Larger projects, like what I'm going through right now, even though communication is very good at this agency, other large projects that I've been on, not so much communication. Again, you had all the subject matter experts in one room for one discipline, and somehow they weren't communicating effectively. So again, communication is very key on any project, large or small.
And from a finance perspective, when you get to the end of a project, I want to make sure that you don't walk away until it's all buttoned up. This involves closing out all the contracts and purchase orders, making sure that you've got your notice of completion filed and you're ready to release retention when that time comes. The contractor's looking for that check, and they're going to be breathing down your neck wanting it. So getting those things done in a timely manner is very important. My personal favorites are the records audit ready. If you're one of the larger projects in your agency for that year, chances are you're going to be audited. And it's a lot harder to go back and clean up your files and make sure everything's present and correct when it's a year later or 6 months later than it is to do it right at the end. Yes, it's like doing the dishes after having a really good meal. It's not very fun, but it's got to be done in order to make sure that you're set in case there's an audit and ready to go for the next thing. One of the things that has tripped me up a couple times is closing the ability to charge staff time to the project. Sometimes people go on autopilot, or they're not quite thinking, and they charge to your project after you think you're done. And that can affect your budget to the point of going over budget. So we'd like to catch those charges early, if possible. But the best way to do it is to close off ability to charge the project through the payroll system. And that way it's not going to happen because it won't go through. And I also think it's really important at the end of a project to take time to celebrate. And one of the things that I really enjoyed being on the project management finance side of it is being included in those celebrations. I've got to say my favorite was we once had a barbecue inside a concrete tank before it was covered. And that was really neat to bring the whole department together, everybody that worked on the project, and sit at the site, see it up close in person, celebrate with staff and with the contractor. We all sat together and ate, pre-COVID, of course. We all sat together and ate and just enjoyed it for a moment. And I think that really helped celebrate the communication and good project coordination that we had on that project and reinforce it for the next time. It's a lot easier to call somebody and say, hey, I need something, when you've sat next to them and had a meal with them and celebrated those successes, and you're not always coming to them with a problem. I think that's really important, especially at the end of a project, to make sure that you take time to celebrate that you're done and you made it and it worked in the end. So, thinking about all these things from our presentation today, what are 2 things from that you've heard today that you can write down and put into practice in your work? And I think, Robert, we were going to open this up for either put it in the chat, or if folks want to, they can speak about this. But I think we really want to think about and take a moment to think about what can change based on today's presentation.
Yes, that's correct, Lydia. You can either write it in the chat or you can speak out. And if we get too many, we'll ask for the raised hand. I know some may not have that raised hand feature at the bottom of their screen. So what are two ideas from this presentation that you can write down and put into practice in your work? And also, if you have any other questions after answering this one, we want to receive those as well. All right. Gary Walker says communication and planning. Yes. And if you want to speak out, raise your hand and then we'll unmute you so you can speak out. Communication and closeout from Sri. Doug Titus says good communication across project phases. Ranithri, hopefully I pronounced that right. Better communication. Any other thoughts? Any ideas that you can put into practice? Mariah says, be mindful of lead times, celebrate successful projects. All right. There's a question here, Steve and Lydia. Do you have advice on setting up shared lingo for everybody in the project? From Miles Johnson.
Well, how to set that up is speak plainly. I catch myself, you know, as I've been an operator, water and wastewater plants, now in supervisor and management. And I caught myself, I was in a meeting and with a contractor in a different agency, and I was throwing out acronyms like it was like, you know, like when I was in the service. And I started saying the word SCADA, because we were talking about I wanted certain information to SCADA. And I didn't have INC people there. I didn't have SCADA engineers there. I had small contracting firm. And afterwards, you know, I that photo of the dog with the eyes going back, that's what I was seeing across it. I didn't recognize it at the time. And so after the meeting, the engineer came up. Now, the contractor came up, who's not an electrical contractor, he's a general. And he goes, what is SCADA? You kept saying the word SCADA, and that was the purpose of the meeting. And I said, oh, it's supervision, control, and data acquisition. And he's like, oh, okay, I understand that. But he didn't understand the acronym. And so, you know, being conscious of that. I know in this field, we all have there's acronyms for everything, just about. And just being conscious that making sure that what you're trying to relay is being put properly in the other person's data banks. So.
And I think from the other perspective too is if you're in a meeting and somebody starts using an acronym that you have no idea what it is, I encourage folks to speak up and say, look, can we clarify what that is? Not everybody's technical in the room. And finance people do it as much as operations, you know, phase encumbrances, carryover, closeout, all sorts of acronyms, you know, that pop up day to day, and we don't think about it. But being more conscious both when you speak, and you're starting to get that kind of reaction of the blinking eyes, but also not being afraid to say, look, what is that? To make sure you're speaking the same language, because if that is the point of the meeting and you spent the whole meeting not knowing what they were talking about, something has been missed in the meeting as well, not just
Right.
communicating what that single thing was. But if you don't understand what the meeting is about, you know, this gets you down the path of not so great communication. So I think it's very important to speak up and ask what those acronyms are, even if you're the only one in the room that might not know it. You don't have to go to the length of getting a certification to understand the conversation. I think it's very important that you don't have to do that. That you can feel free to speak up and say, look, let's clarify that before we move on, because not everybody here is technical.
Great question.
Lydia or Steve, can you guys think of a time perhaps that you intentionally did some plain talk and you got some type of confirmation that was beneficial for someone?
Plain talk, I mean, being on this, talking on the same page, is that what you're trying to ask, Robert?
Yeah, you did something intentionally to make sure you communicated, and you shared a little bit of some stories where the extra communication was beneficial. I'm wondering, because you told us about a time where you were unsuccessful in communicating, and the guy says, "What's SCADA?" And so I want to hear about a time where you learned from that, and then you employed a intentional plan not to do that, and then someone communicated back to you that it was beneficial.
I have a story about that. So one of the agencies that I worked for had a reservoir, but the reservoir was used to be a 32 million gallon reservoir and was dry and had 4 tanks inside it. And I'm getting this kind of funny reaction from the risk manager. And I thought, okay, she's asking for really high levels of insurance on the contract to replace these tanks. There were 4 steel tanks that are being replaced with concrete tanks. This is the concrete tank that we had a picnic in. And it wasn't so much an acronym, but we were clearly not on the same page, because she was asking for basically, if the reservoir somehow failed and flooded, that, you know, this is going to flood the neighborhood, and that was a problem. And we weren't connecting over the phone in a way that was working for us. So I brought the engineer in the room. I said, okay, I need 20 minutes of your time. Can you please explain to her what this project is doing in simple words with pictures? You know, she's not a technical person. Let's talk to her. And it was very clear to me that she was kind of thinking that the reservoir was full to the top with water, where in reality it was a berm with 4 tanks on the inside. And if those tanks were to somehow fail, they would drain and wouldn't fill up the entire reservoir. I mean, they were much smaller. That was on purpose. But it was clear that just in the initial conversation, we weren't connecting well on what exactly is going on and what's needed. And it was really beneficial that we sat down, showed pictures, and talked through, okay, what is the actual risk here? Let's talk about that in a very concrete way, so that she said, okay, well, it's fine now. We can go back to what we felt was more normal levels of insurance for that project. And that probably got us more successful bids than we would have had otherwise. But it also, I think, both the engineer and the risk manager thanked me afterwards and said, okay, this was great. This was very important to sit down and talk about it, even though you would think, it's kind of a mundane transaction of, okay, tell me what the appropriate insurance is for this and I'll go back and put that in the specs. But to really dig down and say, okay, what are we really talking about here? We're talking about a reservoir that's not full and tanks that cannot flood the neighborhood given the setup. So we don't think you should be concerned. So that was one of those, not necessarily super technical, but clearly a misunderstanding that if we went down this path, it was going to cost us money because the contractor would have to have higher levels of insurance.
That's a great example, Lydia.
Yeah.
And, so pictures communicate often better than words at times. Wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah. For myself, Robert, it is, you learn from, your mistakes. And so, the SCADA story I just told, that was when I was very young in my civilian career. And so I learned from that, and, doing a lot of projects and actually just knowing who you're talking to, what are you trying to achieve? Now, I still use acronyms for a lot of things, like especially if I'm doing tours or even like pre-project planning with contractors and stuff like that. But when I do throw out an acronym, I drill that down, like for SCADA or CM, construction manager, project manager, whatever it is. Those seem very simple, but some feedback I got was from a tour I was giving here at Rinconada, and it was for 4-year-olds and their parents. It was a school. It was cool. And so I had parents there with young children. And so I had to be able to communicate effectively to a very broad range of individuals. And so I would, I wouldn't talk down to anybody, but I would make sure that everybody understood what I was trying to relay. And, when I did throw out an acronym or I did throw out something in and I explained it, you could see the light bulb turning on. And I remember on this one tour at the facility I'm at now, I had the parent come to me and go, I learned so much about, water, and now I know all the little acronyms that go along with water. And, it maybe made me feel good. And, it makes you feel good that you're getting and people are getting what you're putting out there. So, yeah.
That's great. That's great. We have another question here. You mentioned larger utilities are more compartmentalized. I'm sorry. What are ways to encourage operator finance and stakeholder engagement during the planning process, especially in times when upper management doesn't see it as important? And this question comes from Brett.
That's a really good question. I think it's really important to show what the benefit is. And that can be through examples of it going well or examples of it going poorly. And, we all kind of learn by doing, but I think making sure that your stakeholder list is complete at the very beginning when you're sitting down and saying, okay, who do I need to talk to about this? We very recently, Valley Water, added that specifically into our procedures for planning, design, and construction, so that the stakeholder list very specifically includes operations and maintenance, to avoid problems like Steve was talking about with the 20-inch gap, which no adult can fit through. I think those kinds of examples really remind people why it's important. It is hard to make sure that you get enough time from folks, whether it's asking O&M to review designs. It's always a struggle to get enough time from folks when they're really busy with other things, but explaining what could happen down the line if there's no input, we want your input on this because we feel that it will best serve you, because it will be designed in a way that you can best access or you can best maintain, or is easier for you to monitor remotely. Things like that are really important for the day-to-day work. And I think it really takes effort on both sides, from O&M saying, hey, we need to be involved, and from engineering say, we absolutely want you involved because it will result in a better product. Finance as well. I mean, I've been to a lot of pre-construction meetings and talking about, okay, this is how invoices are going to be paid. I'm going to be your contact, those kinds of things. And just starting that open line of communication, whether it's planning, design, or construction, so that there are no surprises at the end. And I really think explaining to people what the benefits can be can open some doors to making sure that the right people are involved. But it does take effort on both sides for sure. It's not simple or organic in a way, especially if you're not co-located.
Right, and to kind of add on to that, I mean, as far as the operations perspective, O&M perspective, is, you know, there's got to be obviously a business need. You know, so in so many projects you get project creep or whatever, however you want to put it out. You know, hey, I'd like to have this, I'd like to have that, and it seems that happens on every project. And so be able to communicate the business need effectively. Again, it takes effort to the decision makers, especially in capital and finance, because, you know, if it's a change order, it's gonna there's a cost associated with that. And so again, yeah, just making sure that there's a business need for it, and again, a proper communication.
I think that the examples of it going poorly sometimes are more effective in making sure that people are involved. And I hate to say that in a way, because you don't want to shine negative light on things that could have gone better sometimes, but it can be very simple. Like, you know, we don't have an easement to access this thing that we need to maintain, or you didn't put a gate at the top of you know, a slope down to a creek that we really need access to get our trucks down there because there's no other way to get down there. Those kind of conversations are so important to have towards the beginning, because if they're towards the end, you know, and the construction part's already closed, going back and getting it done can be more of a pain. So those kind of examples can kind of tell the story of, well, if we don't do this, this is what can happen. And I think there are successes, success stories that can be told as well, but sometimes showing the pain of, hey, this didn't work so great, and this is why, it's because this communication was missing, can really illustrate to management, hey, this is why this is important.
Yeah, and real quick, Robert, Lydia hit something right on the head, and I want to expand upon it. But, you know, given O&M enough time to review plans and specifications, and you know, I had a situation at one project, and in this project we thought we had a significant amount of time to do it, but then obviously plant life gets in the way, and we're just about ready to do startup and commissioning of a process at a facility, and this one phrase was brought up, was in the specifications, because I brought up during a project meeting, okay, who's going to be doing the startup commissioning of this new process? And everybody kind of had the little doggy with the blinky eyes, and I'm like, they're like, well, operations is going to do it, and we've never run this process before. This is a brand new process. And I brought like, well, how are we going to do the startup commissioning on a process that we don't have any history on? And well, and they opened up the specification, and there it was, that operations was going to do the startup commissioning. And I was like, no, we can't do that. We don't know how to run it. We need, you know, and here's, if that would have been caught early on, it would have saved the project some money, because we had to get operations specialists in, which wasn't budgeted for, to come in and do the startup and commissioning, and also train my staff on how to do this operations process, new process. So, you know, little things like that can turn around. And again, one small phrase and buried in the middle of specifications it was caught late. And so there was a little project cost associated with that. So.
Great example. You both mentioned communicate, communicate, communicate. What is something that hinders your ability to communicate to the other stakeholders to the degree that you would? What are some things that get in the way of that, or what makes it difficult to do?
As far as from our perspective, like what have we witnessed, or
just what are some of the hindrances? What's some of the things that make it difficult, even if you want to communicate? What are some of the things that obstacles you have to get around in order to make sure you do communicate? And you guys may have covered some of this a little bit, but I wanted to dive a little deeper into that.
I did mention co-location when I talked about, the advantages of small versus big sometimes, is that if you're co-located, you're more likely to sit down and have a chat about something. But here's the thing. If you're not co-located, and Steve and I never were, you need to make the effort. And not necessarily just when you need something, but to build those relationships at the beginning of your tenure and say, look, I'm here, I'm the finance person. I just want to make sure I met you at the beginning of my assignment here. I think throughout my career, I've talked to a lot of operations folks that said, well, finance never comes to visit us. When we talk to them, they don't know the layout of the plant, and they don't know us. And I think it's important to make sure you it's not necessarily always FaceTime, but get some time with them before it's an emergency and you have a huge need on either side. I always like to visit the treatment plants of wherever I'm working and understand what the layout is, but also meet the staff so that I'm not calling them with a frantic question as my first contact. I think that really helps smooth the way. And I'm an introvert. It's not something that I normally would, push myself to go out and do, but it's helped in so many ways that it has always been worth it.
Yeah, I totally agree with
your
that.
introversion is part of your problem.
I guess. I mean,
part of your challenge. Part of your challenge.
It's something I have to push through, and to know that I need to make contact with these folks, because it will go more smoothly if the first thing isn't a giant emergency. I think that just, it puts a bad taste in folks' mouth if you call them and need them to do something for you urgently, and they don't know you, they have no idea what your background is. It just makes it harder. So it's worth it, even though it's not always comfortable in the beginning. It's totally worth it.
Got it. Go ahead, Steve.
No, yeah, I was totally agreeing. The thing is in projects, large or small, again, is cooperation between all parties. And, I've seen in projects that are going well that, people sometimes have the tendency to hold their cards close to them. And especially if the project's going bad, where, the project's going long, it's overcut, yada, yada, yada. I've been in situations where, during this presentation, we're talking about communication, but if someone's professional feelings get hurt, or someone, you have a conflict between two contractors, if it's an electrical sub, if it's whatever, and the general is not communicating effectively, and there's back and forth, pretty soon that communication is going to be at a snail's pace. They're only going to give out the information that's going to affect them, and unfortunately, that's not how it's supposed to work. And I've seen seen projects of going well just get decimated because the general and the subs, or the sub and the sub aren't communicating, or they're not getting along. And the owners, unfortunately, you know, take the blunt of that if the project goes south. So it's very important that everybody gets along and be on the same team. People that know me, I'm a big team guy. You know, let's you know, let's see the end point and let's get there together. You know, we don't necessarily need to like each other, but we have to work well with each other. And you know, unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't happen. And when it does happen, then you do the celebratory barbecue in the tank. And if it doesn't, you do a, oh well, better luck next time. Celebrate in the tank barbecue. So.
And I think Steve brings up a good point that we could spend a whole nother presentation on, which is if you've discovered that there's a communication misstep somewhere, or someone's feelings are hurt, or they think you're arrogant, or they think you don't know anything, it's important to catch that quickly. That can be a pretty uncomfortable conversation sometimes, but I think admitting that you made a mistake, saying you're sorry and that you wanted to go better, is something that has always been worth it. It's hard to do, but if you get to the point where you're barely talking to your contractor or your PM or your CM, that's not good. So if you can catch those things ahead of time, even though you might have to grit your teeth and say, oh, I really don't want to do this. I really feel like recovering from those miscommunications is a whole nother skill level that can be a delicate thing, but again, worth it. So you don't get all this way down the road and you're barely speaking.
So what I'm hearing, guys, is that capital planning is not just technical, it's also relational.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, it is a relationship, and you can kind of put it's a relationship and it's a dance. Everybody's got to move cohesively together to get to the end point, which is a successful project, you know, on time and on or under budget. And it seems like the finance aspect of it sometimes can get in the way, you know, especially when it comes to, you know, change orders and stuff like that. A large change order early in a project can be devastating. A large change, I mean, and then that, you know, somebody's feelings may get hurt, and all of a sudden there starts the degradation of the dance or the relationship. And so we just got to remember that you know, we're especially, you know, when you have multi-disciplines and you have multi-contractors, you have to do the dance. You have to get to the end point successfully.
Great. Well, we're near the end of the webinar, everyone. Please, if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A. And also, you should see a link to a survey for the webinar that we would love for you to complete. And also, you will be receiving this link through email as well. We'd like to hear from you because we like to improve. And we want to do better and make these types of events the most fruitful for you.
We have some resources here of other places to go to learn more about these concepts. There's also more presentations available through Baywork, both through the archive and I imagine also in the upcoming Baywork buffet, if they do it again, the training buffet, big plug for that.
Yes.
But here's other places you can go if you need to know a little bit more, both from the finance side and from the project management and technical side.
Right.
And then, as always, you can always reach out to Lydia and myself if you have any questions in regards not only just to this awesome Bayworks presentation that you just saw, but if you have questions in general, you know, I'm always available. You can reach out to me via email, my work phone, and then obviously LinkedIn is a great resource. You know, I'm constantly monitoring that. I get questions all the time about different operational mechanical needs. So please reach out. Same
for me as well. Now that I left Valley Water very recently, but I'm always willing to talk about the kind of challenges that folks are going through. And it's one of the things I'm focusing on next in my career is helping folks with really challenging situations. So it's It's something I love to talk about. I'm doing this on my vacation because this is something that I really enjoy. And when Steve and Robert call, I say yes. But I think it's, if you have a question, you have something that's bothering you, there's a reason that Steve and I are both coaches. We really like people to be empowered and to improve their skills as they move forward in their careers.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve and Lydia, for this great presentation, providing this information and sharing your experiences. We really appreciate it. And thank all of you for attending with us today.